All right, so today I'm going to talk to you about bandsaw safety. Okay, the bandsaw, this is where we're going to do irregular cuts, irregular curvy cuts here in the wood shop. If we do a cross cut, we're going to use a miter saw. If we're doing a rip cut, we're going to use the table saw. If we're jointing an edge, we're going to use a joiner. But if we're making an irregular cut, we are using the bandsaw. Okay, I consider this to be a dangerous tool if you don't know what you're doing. But basically what you're doing, you're feeding material with your hands towards an open blade that we're guarding as much as possible, but the potential is there for some injury if you don't know what you're doing. I'm not really enthusiastic about anyone using this unless they're very competent with it. You know, I don't mind helping kids out with cuts on this until they can build confidence. So there's some limitations to this machine. Our maximum depth of cut, like the thickest piece that we could cut, it's going to be determined by, and we've got the table here. Okay, this is the table, and this is the upper guide. The maximum depth of cut, and this machine has actually quite an incredible maximum depth of cut. Kind of a scary thing. All right. That's really up there. But this is a 12-inch maximum cut. The maximum depth of cut is determined by the maximum distance between the table and the upper guide. So I've put that upper guide in its highest position right there. Excuse me. The maximum depth of cut is determined by the distance between the table and the upper guide at its maximum position. That will cut a lot of stuff. Okay, this thing doesn't care what it cuts, so you don't want to put the wrong thing in this machine's way. You go to a butcher shop, they've got bandsaws in there. Okay, they're designed to, you know, cut bones and meat. So you really need to watch what you're doing here. There's kind of a process to tuning the bandsaw so everything works correctly, and that falls under my jurisdiction. You know, it's my responsibility to make sure that the blade's cutting properly, that all the adjustments are made correctly, and that it's running well. It is the student's responsibility to let me know, again, if something doesn't look right, feel right, sound right, smell right. Okay? As with any machine, you always wear safety glasses, tie up long hair, remove loose jewelry, baggy sleeves, things like that. Safety glasses, like I said, are always required. Hearing protection is available to all students. Dust respirators are available to all students. Okay, so the upper guide. The height of the upper guide is determined by the board we're cutting. So this board right here, all right, get you down closer. I want the upper guide no more than 1/8 inch maximum above the top of the wood. Okay? I would much rather do that, you know, than have a gap in there that I could send all 4 fingers through. That's going to discourage you from getting fingers in there in the first place. Okay? So that is how high the upper guide should be. You always want to keep your fingers at least 2 inches away from the blade. Okay? Now, let's say that, you know, we're using the bandsaw, and what I try not to do is stand directly in front of the blade. I like to stand off to the side, just a safer place to be. if something should come loose, blade breaks, what have you. Say, I always stand off to the side, and I think that's just a good idea. Now I'm gonna turn on the bandsaw, okay? I'm just gonna cut off a little strap here, okay? Thing that people are tempted to do, you know, is reach in there and grab that little strap. You don't want to do that, okay? You can, you know, we can use a push stick, remove that, or a scrap of wood, but that keeps my fingers well away from the blade. You don't want to be reaching in there too close to the blade to remove that scrap, all right? Doesn't matter if it's the scrap you cut off or the piece you're keeping, you don't want your fingers within 2 inches, okay? Now, let's say that we're going to draw a line here, okay? The thing you got to understand about this machine, it's largely subjective to operator function. With a miter saw, you're just pulling the blade down through the board and it makes a straight cut. Same thing with the table saw. All you're doing is pushing the board through the machine. This relies on you to steer back and forth through a cut to follow an irregular line, okay? And it does take some practice, all right? So let's say, if I can get this close enough, all right. What I'm going to do, this is what I don't want to do. I don't want to push my hands just directly towards the blade. I want to hold the board to the side so that if something should slip off, I'm not slipping towards the blade. So try to hold the piece on the side. Try to always position your hands so if they slip or if you make a miscalculation, they're not going directly towards the blade. So assuming that this is the piece I want to keep and this is my scrap, I want to cut just to the scrap side of the line, okay? I'm going to keep my hands here to the side and I'm going to try to cut just to the scrap side of the line, okay? Now let's say that, let me go a little further here. Let's say that we start to make a mistake, like I'm starting to cut away from the line, I don't like it. The first thing a student is going to want to do is like back out of that cut, all right? And you don't want to do that. What you need to do is turn the machine off, and I'm going to explain why. You don't want to try to back out of that cut. Trying to back around all those curves usually results in you pulling the blade off the wheels, off the front of the wheels, which is not a good idea at all. The blade's coming to a stop, okay? Now I can safely back out of that cut. The first thing students always want to do is just pull it back out of the cut. And then blade comes off the wheels. And usually they say, I don't know what happened. So I'm just like taking you through the most likely scenario there. All right. So I can back out and start again if I want. Okay. So that's how you would back out of a cut. Now, this blade, you know, it's just a thin band of metal. Okay. You can see it right here. It goes around 2 wheels, one upper and one lower. So that little thin band of material, all right. And this machine has safeties on it, safety switches, so that if any of the covers are open, it won't run. Okay. But this band is like tack welded, it's spot welded, I'm sorry, in one spot. And that's how it makes a continuous loop. Usually, the only way you're gonna break a blade is if you put an unusual amount of stress on it. Okay. As in, like you're putting a lot of side stress on the blade, okay, or just trying to cut too much, or if you get a blade, say like you hit something hard, and a lot of times you'll dull the teeth on one side of blade, but not the other. You know, you got like every other tooth points outward to the opposite direction. or each tooth has a set to it, okay? So once that happens, you get dull teeth, like say on the left side of your blade, but not on the right, then what's gonna happen is it's gonna start cutting. It's not gonna wanna cut in a straight line. And trying to force it to cut on that straight line just causes more stress. So keeping a sharp blade on this is important, but knowing how to prevent a dull blade in the first place is important. If a blade breaks, here, let me back up. If a blade breaks, you turn it off and step away from the machine, notify the instructor. You don't try to get your board out of there. You're not going to want to try to get your board out of there. You just turn it off and step away from the machine and notify the instructor. That is the protocol. Okay? So, if we need to get in here, you know, with our fingers close to the blade, make any sort of adjustments, and this is usually going to be me. You know, if I have to put a new blade on, I'm going to tune it so it's riding, you know, in the center of the wheel, in the center of the tire. I'm going to adjust it so it's the correct tension. I'm going to adjust the ceramic guide blocks here. These all help the blade track, you know, straight and true. There's a lot of adjustments. Everything you see here is repeated below the table here, okay? And so there's a lot of adjustments for me to make. When I do that, as with any machine, when I get my fingers in there around the blade, I want to disconnect power first. Okay, so let's talk about cuts here a little bit. So this thing, you know, I drew a line, okay? I'm just going to make a cut. Everyone can see that, I hope. Not a very heavy line. Let me try to make that a little heavier. Got a bad shadow here too. Okay, there's my line. I'm going to cut to the waist side of that. Notice how I keep the blade on the strap side of the line, and then later I'll go back and sand to that line. If I cross that line and that's the shape I want, then in essence I've ruined my piece. So people cross that line into the piece they want to keep, and they think they can still save it. A lot of times they'll keep going, and they'll either make an error or ruin the piece or cause undue stress on the bandsaw. I always keep my hands to the side there so you can see my cut here. I've got just a little bit of excess on the scrap side of the line here, so I can sand to the line. I can pull this piece of scrap out without getting within 2 inches. Okay? Now, let's say that I need to make a real sharp cut. Like that. A very sharp cut. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and make relief cuts. And what it's going to do, I'm going to make relief cuts first, and then that's going to relieve tension on the blade as I go around this corner. I'm going to show you that. Okay, I got a tiny little straight cut. I can pull it back out of there safely. Okay. Let's start doing your regular cuts. You don't want to back out. What I'm doing is I'm making a series of cuts close together. So as I go around this sharp curve, it removes pieces of wood and takes tension off the blade. You'll see that happen here in a second. Okay. Okay, that's what we've got. That series of cuts, those are relief cuts. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to go in, start cutting the actual shape that we wanted. And every time I come to a cut, it's going to take the tension off that. It may become necessary, if you get straps in here that interfere with your cut, it may become necessary to actually shut the machine off and clear some of these tiny little straps away from the blade. I always keep my hands to the side never pointing directly towards the blade. Okay? So, there's your cut, all cleaned out, ready to sand. You see all those scraps from the relief cut. Do not want to grab those. Again, last thing I want to stress before I turn this off, anywhere in the shop, if you are not 100% certain, do not proceed. You know, we shouldn't, safety in the shop should not involve guesswork. If you are not 100% confident in exactly what you should and shouldn't do with the machine, do not turn it on.